Jason, you might want to turn your video.
All right, I have 11 a.m. Central Time, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our first webinar in the Midday Master Beef webinar series. My name is Courtney Bridges. I'm the Beef Programs Coordinator for the University of Tennessee. So myself and Dr. Justin Reinhardt will be hosting these webinars throughout the series, and we're very excited to be able to continue offering the Master Beef program on the virtual platform. And thank you all for joining us in the middle of your day. With that said, we've designed these to be a shorter course, so we will strive to be done right at the hour time. Just a few housekeeping things. Let me flip through my slides before we get started. So if you'd like to ask any content-related questions, you'll see a Q&A box down at the bottom. So we ask that you ask any content or speaker-related questions in the Q&A box. But anything related to structure or you're having any issues or anything like that, you can ask in the chat box, but we'll be monitoring both. So any questions you want to ask the speaker in the Q&A box. So throughout the webinar, we're going to be using what's called the polling function. And this is just an example of what that'll look like. So I will activate questions to pop up so that we can have some interaction while Jason is presenting. If they don't pop up or you don't see them, don't worry. This is just for interaction during the webinar, so they are not required. And without further ado, I would like to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Jason Smith. Some of you may recognize Dr. Smith as he previously served as a beef extension specialist at UT, but has since moved to Texas A&M based out of Amarillo. So I won't take up any more of your time, Jason, and I will turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Courtney. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you're good.
Excellent. I'm working on sharing my screen right now. How's that?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you. I appreciate you and Dr. Reinhardt providing me with the opportunity to be a part of the webinar series. And and be the first one to go. I'm going to apologize ahead of time for my voice. Hopefully it's going to last throughout the hour. But if it doesn't, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So I'm going to spend the next 45 minutes or so covering body condition. And we'll start with providing an overview of the U.S. beef body condition scoring system. I'm very specific in the wording I use there because if we get outside of the U.S., there's a different scale that's used. If we start dealing with non-beef cattle, so dairy cattle, it's also a different scale that's used. And so the scale I'll talk about for evaluating and quantifying body condition is going to be unique to us for beef cattle here in the U.S. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about why we as beef cattle producers should care about body condition, how and when we should monitor body condition, and then really focus on how to put that information into use on the operation. Let's talk about the value and why at least I view body condition as being one of the most impactful things in terms of its ability to influence productivity of our cow herds. But then really the how to put it in place and how to use that information to make some positive change on the operation. Okay, so I want to start, and Courtney, I think you'll have to initiate the polling, right? With just two introductory questions, and the first one, if you can go ahead and get that popped up there, is: do you regularly evaluate body condition of your cow herd? And I'll take just a few moments for y'all to go ahead and submit your answers.
Yep, and you should see that popped up, and you can just click yes or no. If you don't have it on your screen, don't worry, but if you can answer, we have a poll question activated.
And Courtney, refresh my memory, you have to close it before the results show up, correct? They don't show up in real time?
Right, yeah, I'll share results with you.
Perfect. I'll let you decide how long we need to wait for that.
Okay. Oh, give me 1 second, Jason.
Okay.
Okay, there you go. Sorry, guys. That was my fault, and I had it activated on the wrong screen. So now you should be able to answer.
Perfect.
Yes or no. Do you regularly evaluate body condition of your cow herd?
So if an attendee or participant answered before, they need to answer again, right?
Well, it wasn't recording any of the answers.
Right.
So now we are. So yes, try to answer again if you tried previously.
Perfect.
And I'm going to share these results with you.
Okay, excellent. Excellent. So the vast majority of you, 88% said yes. So hopefully the remaining 12%, I'll provide you with some compelling reasons to start to utilize body condition and evaluating body condition in your operation. And hopefully those of you, the 88% that said yes, I'll provide you with some information to convince you to keep doing it. So the second question, are you, so not only are you evaluating body condition, but are you taking that information gained from evaluating body condition and then using it to make management changes or selection and culling decisions?
Maybe about 5 more seconds if you haven't answered.
Okay.
Looks like most people have. Okay, sharing those with you.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So even more in favor of yes. And I think that's an important concept because we can spend all day talking about body condition. But at the end of the day, its value is in the information that it provides us to make more informed and better management decisions. If we're not using it to do those things, there's not a lot of value in us evaluating body condition. Okay. And so I think that's a key thing for us to recognize is not just focus on evaluating it, but actually taking that information and putting it into use, putting it into practice in a way that's going to be beneficial to the operation. Okay, so this US beef system, we use a scale of 1 through 9 to subjectively rate the state of body condition for a particular animal. Okay, so we're rating cows or bulls or cattle in general from 1 to 9 in terms of how much fat and how much muscle tone we believe that those animals have. Okay, why it's important and why body condition matters is that it serves as our primary indicator of nutritional status for those animals. Okay, and so generally speaking, our ideal body condition for a mature cow at both calving and breeding is going to be somewhere either equal to or north of a 5 on that 1 to 9 scale. Okay, if we're calving cows at a body condition score of 5, we want to calve our first calf heifers at least 1 body condition score greater than the mature cows. So if we're calving, an average of our mature cows is a 5, we want to calve those heifers at a 6. And that's particularly important if we are not separating those different ages or production groups of animals and managing them separately, because they're different. Those animals are absolutely different. Those heifers require somewhere in the vicinity of 10 to 15% more protein and energy to meet their requirements because they're still growing. Same is true for our young cows up until we get to about the age of 5. And so that calving those females at a higher body condition really serves as our insurance, particularly when our nutritional management program has been set up to just meet the requirements of the cows. Okay. All right. So I mentioned body condition serves as an indicator of nutritional status, and that therein lies the value of body condition and scoring cattle, evaluating their condition and putting numbers to it so we can use that information to make management decisions. Okay, where nutritional status comes into play is that nutrition is the primary environmental factor that influences an animal's productivity. True for cattle, true for all other animals. Okay, nutrition makes up the majority of that environmental component of the environment interacts with genetics to produce that animal's phenotype. Okay, so our cattle that are in an ideal state of body condition are more likely to realize their genetic potential for reproduction, health, and longevity. They're also more likely to perform at a higher level from a calf growth, efficiency, and calf health standpoint. Okay, you've probably seen this slide or this schematic in some way, shape, or form, whether it's one I put together while I was there or another one. But what I've done is I've taken and pared down basically a couple page long list of different things that a cow may use nutrients to do. Okay, that cow partitions or prioritizes the use of those nutrients. Okay, she prioritizes them first to her own survival, second to the survival of the one that she's already produced, and then lastly, she will, in situations where a surplus is available, she will devote those nutrients towards supporting a new pregnancy or establishing a new pregnancy. Okay, so what happens in a situation where we're not meeting that female's requirements is she takes an axe to the bottom of this list and starts working her way up. Repro is the first thing to go. Okay, the estrous cycle and establishing a new pregnancy. Okay, she's going to sacrifice that first if she is in a nutritional state that does not tell her brain that she is capable of creating and supporting another one. Okay, therein lies the value of body condition when we are not physically capable of feeding her enough, or we don't put her in the environment that meets 100% of her protein and energy requirements. Okay, so in terms of ideals, and we'll spend quite a bit of time talking through these. So this is a data set that shows the influence of body condition score on the postpartum interval to return to estrus. So how body condition score influences the amount of time it takes a cow to start cycling once she's calved. Okay. And the important thing that I want to point out is these 5s and 6s. Okay, 59 and 52 days on average in this data set. And it's a lot of cattle, comprehensive data set that has proven to be correct. Okay, so the thing to point out is that we would expect the first heat, the first cycle of that female post calving to be less than ideal in terms of her likelihood of getting pregnant. Okay, so we'd expect that she needs to cycle once, and then once she cycles, she's going to be more likely to get pregnant and following or subsequent cycles. Okay, and so basically what we have to do is we have to add 21 days to these numbers to get an idea of answering the question of how likely is she to get pregnant within enough time so that she calves once a year. Okay. And so if we add 21 days to each of these body condition score 5s and up, we're good. On average, we'd expect those cows to calve at least once every calendar year. It's body condition scores 3s and 4s. So 89 plus 21 is going to be what, 111. 110. 4 plus 21, or excuse me, 70 plus 21 is going to be 91 days. Okay. So we need to be somewhere in the vicinity, depending upon gestation length, of 83 to 85 days post calving that a cow gets pregnant in order for her to calve once a calendar year. Okay. Another way of showing similar information, but how body condition score influence and overall pregnancy rate. A lot of cattle for a lot of different ranches and in different locations. And these were in defined calving seasons. The point being that overall pregnancy rate of cows that calved at body condition scores 5 and 6 are acceptable. Okay. Cows that calve at body condition scores 4 and lower, those are typically not going to be acceptable for most operations. Okay. And especially not operations that we want to actually turn a profit on that cow herd. So what I've done is I've taken some of those numbers and some others and really drawn a line at how body condition score at calving influences calving interval. So the amount of time, but that the number of days that pass between calving events for a mature female. Okay. And that intersection, so this dotted line is 365 days. So that's one calendar year. That intersection happens for body condition score 5s right at that 365 day mark. Okay. So we need to be there or north of there if we expect the average cow to calve once a year. Okay. If we're lower than that, we can expect it to take longer in order for those cows to calve again. Okay. In a lot of situations, this is really one of the things that's caused year-round calving seasons, because we typically don't start that way. But cattle not being matched to our environment and us not changing that environment or changing the cattle, or preferably some combination of the two, to bring them closer to this ideal state, causes those calving seasons to spread out over time. The other thing that's important that I think we point out is that not only does an increase in body condition at calving increase the total percentage of females that we'd expect to get pregnant, but as it relates back to that postpartum interval to return to estrus, so the amount of time that it takes for them to start cycling again, as body condition goes up, cows typically get pregnant earlier in the breeding season, which generally means that they're going to be more likely to calve early in the calving season. Okay. And so from an economic relevance standpoint, I'd ask you, what's 2 pounds a day over 21 days worth at, we'll say, $1.60 per pound? That's going to be somewhere in the vicinity of 60 to 70 bucks per cow, just in terms of additional value of that calf that's attributed to her calving one estrus cycle earlier. Okay. And so body condition is economically relevant. It has economic consequences. Okay. Now what I want to do is shift gears a little bit and take some time to work through body condition and what it looks like. So this would be more geared towards those of you that don't have as much experience evaluating body condition, or those of you that maybe want to brush up a little bit on your techniques and strategies. Okay. And so I've listed our 1 to 9 body condition scores and how I'm going to simply describe them. So everywhere from extremely emaciated for a body condition score of 1 to extremely obese for a body condition score 9. And we're going to talk about all of these in a little more detail. But at the end of the day, I think these are the important things to keep in mind. Essentially, our body condition scores 4 to 7 are going to be our functional condition scores. Okay, we would hope that most of the cattle in our cow herd would belong to one of these 4 categories. Okay, our 1s to 3s, those cattle are generally too thin. Okay, 1's absolutely too thin, 2's absolutely too thin, 3's 99% of the time too thin. Okay, and then our 8s and 9's going to be the other end of that extreme. These are going to be those cattle that are going to be too fat. Doesn't mean they can't function and they can't be a valuable addition to the herd. Some cattle will calve every year, raise an acceptable calf, and maintain a body condition score 8. That's great if they'll do it. Okay, more often than not, there's a reason why they're that fat. Okay, and more often than not, that is not because of biological efficiency. Courtney, I'm not sure why, but let me see if I can get it to go. There we go. All right. So just a quick overview and a snapshot of what our 1 to 8 looks like. We'll go through each of these, but the important thing to keep in mind as we move from 1 to 4, then from 5 on to 8, is that these cows look less skinny. And I mean, I think that's an important thing to keep in mind, is that we spend a lot of time focusing on specific numbers, but the reality is what's important. And the important things are they too thin? Are they ideal? Or are they over conditioned? And we'll talk about that in a little more detail. Okay. One of the other things that I think is important to point out that we have not done as good of a job as in terms of an extension community and communicating this, is that there are weight changes associated with changes in body condition. Okay, that's by default. Okay, weight changes because there's more or less condition that cow is carrying around. There's more or less fat, there's more or less protein or muscle that she's carrying around with her. Okay, and so what I've done is I've broken down those changes that we would expect based on this golden standard of a body condition score 5 cow that weighs 1,300 pounds. Okay, the relative percentage change increases slightly as we get farther away from a body condition score 5 on either end, but we would expect each body condition score to change that cow's body weight by approximately 7.5 to 10%. Okay. And so if we go from a 5 to a 6, it's almost 100 pounds. 5 to 7, it's almost 200 pounds, and so on and so forth. The same is true as we go in the other direction. Okay. So I would encourage you, as you evaluate cow size and cow condition, for those of you that may weigh cows, if you don't, highly encourage you to do it. A $2,500 to $3,000 set of portable scales will pay you back in a very, very small amount of time. Okay, I'm gonna leave it at that. That's probably a topic for another webinar, Justin and Courtney, and that's something we're actually spending quite a bit of time working in out in the Panhandle right now. But the point being is that we can take a 1,300 pound cow and make her look like 1,100 pound cow if she's really skinny. Okay. And the opposite is true for over conditioned cows. So I think that's something important to keep in mind. And is if we only select cattle, let's just say we're trying to decrease mature cow weight, and we're only doing it based on weight, we're not incorporating body condition. So we're not standardizing weights back to a body condition score of 5. We will favor these low conditioned cows. Okay. And that can be incredibly costly if we're not also basing those decisions primarily on reproductive status and reproductive productivity. Okay. Again, just showing those 4 to 7s are going to be functional, or 1s to 3s are too thin, and our 8s to 9s are too fat. Okay. I'm going to provide you my reference landmarks. Everybody has their own opinions on which ones are more important, where to start. But I'm going to kind of walk you through how my mind works when I'm evaluating body condition on a female. If we're working cows, I'm going to go through all these in somewhere in the vicinity of 2 to 5 seconds. Okay, so I'm doing this really, really quickly. Don't expect if you're starting out to be able to do it that quickly, but the more you evaluate cattle, the faster and easier it will be for you to pick up on indicators of condition. Okay, so our first location, or at least the first location that I focus on, is going to be the ribs. The second location is going to be the spine and top line, and really I'm looking for bone. Are rib lines pronounced? Am I seeing vertebrae? Am I seeing bones stick out of her top line? At her tail head, does it appear that there's any fat covering it, or is it pretty barren? Okay, same with her hooks or her hip bones and her pin bones. Okay, so do they appear to be covered with fat, or are they pretty prominent? And can I see those bony processes very clearly? Her brisket, how full is her brisket? How empty is her brisket? And her hindquarter, that's going to be my primary indicator of muscling. Okay, so muscle condition. Does she have some muscle expression? Does she not? One thing that we have to keep in mind is that more muscular cows may try to trick you into thinking they're in a greater state of condition than cows that do not have a considerable amount of muscle shape. But again, as I'm changing gloves or doing something as a cow's leaving the chute, I'm looking up, I'm checking out her ribs, her top line, back to her tail head, her hooks and her pins. Gonna try and grab a glance at her brisket, and then looking at her hindquarter as she moves to see how much muscle shape is there. Excuse me. All right, so I'm going to go through each of these in a little more detail. I'm going to start with what I perceive as this body condition score 1 cow that's extremely emaciated. Essentially, there's no fat visible on this animal. There's almost no muscle shape or tone visible on this animal, and you can count almost every bone in her body. Her tail head, her ribs, her top line are incredibly prominent. This represents a health and welfare concern. This represents starvation in that animal. The cause of that is then, that can be, this is not necessarily an animal cruelty issue, depending upon what caused this animal to get to that point. But I would argue that there's absolutely no reason why an animal should ever get to this state of condition on our operation. She should have been marketed far before she got to this condition. If she gets marketed in this condition, the packer is not going to harvest her. Okay, that animal will be euthanized on the spot in the loadout area. She is not going to go through that process, and that is going to influence what that buyer is willing to pay for cattle in the future. Okay, I've seen that firsthand. But again, there's absolutely no excuse for allowing cattle to get to this state of condition. And one of the things to keep in mind is that this animal will not be productive. She will not get pregnant. She will not support a calf on her side. Milk production has ceased if the calf wasn't already weaned, and she's not going to get bred. Okay, just using a couple other examples. The one on the right, these are some Nelore cows in Brazil. often fall back on those to use my body condition score ones, because ones in the US are fairly few and far between. I do use this one picture that I got from, I think it's a Dr. Bates picture. It's often used for to represent fescue toxicosis. I don't believe this cow suffering from fescue toxicosis. I think this cow has Johne's disease, but that's my opinion. Nonetheless, just a couple different ways at looking at incredibly poor condition, extremely emaciated cow. Okay, moving on to a slightly higher degree of condition or body condition score 2. A lot of bones are still prominent. Start to see a little more muscle shape. You can't count quite as many of those bones. Okay, so some of those bones are less prominent. There's a small amount of tissue covering the first few ribs. We can still easily see or feel the spine. And the important thing to keep in mind, though, is that at this state of condition, productivity is going to be extremely negatively impacted. We would not expect these cattle to get pregnant or to carry a pregnancy to term in that state of condition. Just a couple more examples of what I'm going to call body condition score 2 cows. You know, in your all's environment, those are going to be still relatively few and far between. I'd argue the same thing for our body condition score 2s as I did for 1s. I don't think there's any reason to allow cattle to get to this poor of a state of condition. I was lucky enough to have Dr. Matt Hersom share these pictures with me. These are actually from a cull cow refeeding study that he did when he was still at the University of Florida, but provided some really good pictures out of that. Okay, move on to a body condition score 3. So for most of us, this should be the thinnest degree of condition that we'd see on our operation. Okay, this cow's thin, but she's not emaciated. Okay, we can still see a lot of individually identifiable ribs, but they're covered with more tissue than a body condition score 2 was. Okay, start to see small amounts of fat and a little more muscle condition throughout her body. But we're still going to expect this state of body condition to negatively impact reproduction. Okay, so more often than not, this cow will not get pregnant again until she is in a better state of condition, which often requires weaning the calf and getting her through another potential grazing season before she'll do that. Okay, a couple other pictures of body condition score 3 cows. I use this cow on the left as an example because this cow was a little bit of a anomaly. Okay, and there are a lot of these in various operations. She's a cow that it did not matter what you could do, you'd never get her body condition score above a 4, but she was incredibly productive. So there are some of those unicorns. Okay, and so I'd encourage you not to only make culling decisions based on body condition. Pair it with some other metric of productivity like reproduction. I mean, if we want to think about economically relevant traits to cow-calf production, those are the two that we really want to focus on. All right, moving on to a body condition score 4. So we've stepped into our functional condition scores. Okay, still see some ribs, but they're much less obvious. Still see a little bit of spine, but not terribly prominent. We're starting to see some fat covering her bones. We're starting to see a little more muscle shape and condition. A lot of these cows may still get pregnant, but as the numbers that I provided to you previously, a much smaller portion of them will get pregnant when compared to our greater body conditions. Just a couple other different examples of some 4s. This one on the right, I'm starting to bring a little bit of ear or Bos indicus influence into the equation. Okay, and one of the things that's important to keep in mind, and I'll mention this later on, is that we got to make sure that we don't confuse loose excess skin with body condition. Okay, all right, moving on to what I'm going to call one of our ideal states of body condition, I'll call a 5, a cow that's in modest, good condition. Pretty hard to count bones. She's got fat covering all of her ribs. And then she's got noticeable fat deposits over her top line, her hip, her tail head, and her pin bones. Really, this cow looks healthy. She looks fit. She has some muscle shape and tone. This is going to be one of the ideal conditions for productivity. Okay, just a couple other examples of cows that I'm going to call a body condition score 5. All right, moving on to the 6 that we'll refer to as moderate or great condition. This is a female that, if we compare her back to a 5, looks very similar, slightly more fat, slightly more muscle shape and tone. This is going to be a great state of condition in terms of productivity. It's also going to be a state of condition that's not going to be economical to maintain, at least not all the time, in most of our production settings. Okay, unless we're in a situation where we're potentially dry lotting cows, or in a situation where we have access to very economical feed resources. Just a couple other examples of cows in states of condition that I'm going to call a 6 based on looking at them in these pictures. Okay, our 7s, as we go on, we're still in our functional, but we're at the higher end of what I'm going to call functional condition. This is going to be a cow that I'm going to say is slightly over conditioned, but we would not expect performance to be negatively impacted. Okay, she's fleshy. She carries some extra fat. That excess fat is evident, particularly over her hips, over her pin bones, and over her tail head. Start to see it accumulate in her brisket as well. The important thing to keep in mind, and I think now is an important time to address this, is notice how I said that performance would not be expected to be negatively impacted. Okay. There is a fear of what I'm going to call fat cows. Okay. We haven't gotten to that point yet. Okay. This body condition score 7 cow is still going to be productive. I would far rather try to get this body condition score 7 cow pregnant than a body condition score 3 or 4. Okay, she's going to be far more likely to get pregnant. Just a couple different pictures and some different angles of cows that I'm going to call or likely call a 7 in the field. Okay, moving on to our 8s. Okay, these are going to be cows that we refer to as being obese. They're over conditioned to the extent that it may impact productivity. It won't necessarily always impact productivity, but I think one of the important things to keep in mind about these is, again, as we talk about hating on fat or over conditioned cows, in my opinion, there's a little bit of a chicken versus the egg question to be answered. It is my opinion that most fat cows that we have problems with trying to get pregnant, we don't have problems with getting them pregnant because they're fat. I believe that the majority of those are fat because we did not get them pregnant. Okay, and I'll defer any questions on that back to our repro specialist if he's able to stay on. But nonetheless, that's been my experience. There are certainly uniquities and exceptions to those rules of thumb, but again, we're going to see some evidence of some excessive fat in that female. But again, I'm not certain that in most situations that's driving infertility. It just seems to be that those infertile cows are fat. The other thing to keep in mind is we've approached the state of condition that we would expect to increase dystocia or calving difficulty. And it's not because the calf's any bigger. It's just because this female has deposited some internal fat. So she's trying to move a same size calf through a smaller opening, a more restricted birth canal because of those fat depositions. Okay, but it's not until we get to a body condition score of 8 or greater that I'd expect us to see an increased incidence of dystocia. Okay, just a couple other examples of females in the field that I'm going to call an 8. Body condition score 9s. I'm going to show you 3 pictures of these, and as far as I know, they're the only 3 pictures of body condition score 9s that exist. I've never seen a 9 in the flesh. These cattle are extremely obese. If we look at them, we're gonna think that is a morbidly obese cow. We would not expect her physiologically to function anywhere near normal. Okay, so this is a situation where we probably would expect some infertility as a function or as a consequence of a female being fat. The question still becomes, is she fat because she's infertile, or is she infertile because she's fat? And at this degree of condition, I think there's probably a little bit of both coming into play. But the fat deposits are going to be extremely large. They're going to be incredibly pronounced. This female is going to look like she's going to have trouble moving. Excuse me. We would expect this female to have an incredibly difficult time trying to give birth to a live calf. These are the other pictures of body condition score 9s. Excuse me. Just to give you an idea, the reality is that most of you probably will never see or experience a female that has that degree of condition. All right, Courtney, just in case I already put you to sleep, I'm going to give you a reminder that we're getting ready to do a polling question. So I want to walk through a little bit of a cheat sheet, and I'm going to ask you some questions as we go through this. But the important thing is we start evaluating condition and trying to do that in a way that is useful and adds value to the operation. I think the questions to ask are, as we first evaluate a female, is she ideal? Is she thinner than ideal, or is she fleshier or fatter than ideal? Okay, and so Courtney, if you want to go ahead and put that first question up for this female in the picture, go ahead and evaluate her. Is she ideal, thinner than ideal, or fatter than ideal? And if the question box popped up over top of the picture of the cow, just click on it, hold down with your cursor, and move the box over to the left, and it should move out of the way for you.
We'll do these pretty quick, so I'll give about 10 more seconds to answer if you haven't been able to answer.
Another
Okay.
cough drop primed up.
All right, I'm sharing those results with you.
Okay, so by and large, the majority of you rated this cow consistently with how I would have. I'm going to say this is a cow that's in an ideal state of condition. Okay, and so if she's ideal, that means she's a 5 or 6. Okay, so as we start to train our eyes to evaluating these things, if I think she's ideal, it tells me, all right, she's 5 or 6. I just need to pick one of those 2. So she's going to be a 5 if she looks like she's in good condition, she's fit, but maybe in clean, what I'm going to call clean working clothes. Okay, she's going to be a 6 if she's in good condition, maybe a little extra fat showing, but she's the front pasture kind of condition. She's the degree of condition that you really want to show off to someone and say, look at this cow. Doesn't she look nice? So Courtney, let's go ahead and put up the next question. So I'm going to ask you, since we've already decided this cow's ideal, is she a 5 or is she a 6?
Maybe 5 more seconds if you haven't been able to answer. Okay, there's your results.
All right. Actually, more of you called her a 6 than a 5. I'm going to call this cow a 5. And the reason for that is I don't see a lot of excess fat deposit. I think she's in clean working clothes. She's a little hairy for a South Texas kind of non-ear influence cow. But again, I'm going to call her a 5. Okay. All right. Now, looking at these 2 pictures on the right, Are these cows ideal? Are they thinner than ideal, or are they fatter than ideal? Okay, and these cows are, the thing to keep in mind is they do have some Bos indicus or ear influence, so some Brahmin influence. So they're going to have some extra dewlap, particularly that cow in the top picture. They're going to have a little extra navel. They're going to have some flap that we don't want to confuse with fat or muscle.
There's the results. Got it.
Perfect. You know, almost 3/4 you said these are thinner than ideal, and I agree. To me, the first thing when I look at these that tells me they're thinner ideal is ribs. I can see there's some prominence to the ribs. I can see different bony processes. It's going to tell me right off the bat they're thinner than ideal. Okay, so she's thinner than ideal. She's a 1, 2, 3, or 4. Okay, I already mentioned ones are pretty rare. They're very few and far between. If she's a 1, that means she looks like she's on her deathbed, and she probably is not going to even be able to make another trip to the water. Okay, most of us won't see those. Hopefully, most of us won't see those. She's a 2. She's terribly thin, but she's still somewhat thrifty. You can't count every single bone in her skeleton. Okay, she's a 3. You can still see quite a few bones. There's only a little bit of muscle, a little to no fat, but she isn't emaciated. She still looks like she's a functional cow. Okay, and then 4, she's really just a touch on the thin side. She's just shy of being ideal in her state of condition. So we'll start with this next question of rate the condition of the cow in the picture on the top. Is she a 3 or a 4? I'll make it easy for you. I'll tell you she's not a 1 and she's not a 2. Okay, so is she a 3 or a 4? All right, most of you called her a 3. I agree. She's a 3 in my book as well. All right, now let's pull up the next one and let's score this cow in the bottom picture. She a 3 or a 4? And as a little bit of a cheater, you know, we called that top cow a 3. So one of the things to ask yourself is, does this bottom cow, is she the same degree of condition? Is she a little thinner? We said they're all 3s or 4s, so she's not thinner. Or is she a little fleshier? Okay. All right. Most of you said 4. Excellent. Excellent. I think we're getting closer to where we need to be. Yeah, I mean, she's still got some prominence to her ribs, but the big thing for me and difference between these two is her top line, the number of bony processes we can see. So again, to me, 3s and 4s. All right. All right. Now let's look at this cow. Okay. She ideal? She thinner than ideal, or is she fatter than ideal? All right. Almost all of you said fatter than ideal. I agree. Okay. This cow is going to be just starting in and over, she's over conditioned. Okay. And so if she's fatter than ideal, that means she's a 7, 8, or 9. Okay. If she's a 7, she's just a little more fat than what would be ideal, but she's still going to be functional. She's an 8. She's really fat, but not to the extent that she looks like she can hardly move around. And if she's a 9, again, like 1s, very few and far between. Most of us probably never see them. Almost all you can see is fat, and it looks like she might fall over just from having to walk around or move around a little bit. So of those and those considerations, and thinking about this picture of this cow, is she a 6? Is she a 7? Or is she an 8? All right. Good deal. Most of you, the majority of you said 7. I agree. This cow for me is a 7. She's not to the point to where we'd expect her to be over conditioned to where it affects productivity. And so I think, the reason I show you these couple pictures is to try to give you an idea of the range of where we would expect most of our cattle to fall, and give you some pictures that you can fall back on to use as references. Okay, a couple additional rules of thumb that I haven't mentioned. Most of what we've talked about has been for what I'm going to call straight British or continental type cattle with little to no Bos Indicus or Brahman influence. There are some other breed differences, but before we get too far into that, I do want to say, don't forget the bulls. The same concepts apply to bulls. The thing you need to keep in mind is that we would hope that muscling is going to be more evident in bulls than in the females, even at lower condition scores. So don't let that bias you. And I think this bull at the bottom does a good job of depicting what a body condition score 5 bull is. Okay, and so we want to be somewhere in the vicinity of body condition scores 5s or 6s at turnout time. Okay, for that bull to have enough condition so that he can burn some and stay fertile, but not be over conditioned to the extent that he's going to be lazy or he's going to have some other fertility issues because of that degree of condition. Okay, Coriani, so roping type cattle and longhorn influence cattle, those cattle are really deceiving. I don't have pictures to show you, but those cattle appear to be thinner than others at a given state of condition. Okay, so oftentimes those cattle, when we would call them a 3 or a 4, they would have a similar amount of condition as a 4 or a 5 because they deposit fat a little differently. They accumulate condition a little differently than our non-Coriani and non-longhorn influenced cattle do. So they'll look a little skinnier than they really are. Our heavily Brahman influenced cattle, I mentioned, don't confuse loose or excess skin with fat. We'll also see some disparity in different parts of the animal. So we'll often see that those cattle may look like they're in thinner condition over their ribs than they would over parts of their hind quarter and their brisket. Some of that as a function of excess skin, some of it as a function of potentially maybe some differences in how they mobilize fat. Same would be true for our heavily British influence breeds. We use Herefords as an example. As those females get older, they appear to, for whatever reason, mobilize fat from different parts of their body a little differently. And so we may, if only looking at a hind quarter, really tailhead and hooks and pins, we may want to call one a 7 or an 8. We're looking at her ribs, we may want to call her a 3 or a 4. And so we've got to look at all these different parts and pieces of the equation and bring them back to arrive at what we would expect their average condition to be. The other thing is that hair can be deceiving, particularly heavy winter hair coats. They can be difficult to see through. So just keep that in mind as you're evaluating cattle. So when to evaluate them, in my opinion, it's every time you see them. Every time you lay eyes on them is an opportunity to evaluate condition. Maybe we don't need to score every cow in the herd every time we look at them, but we want to be looking at them and asking, okay, are they too thin? Are they ideal? Or are they a little too fleshy? Maybe be on the lookouts for the highs and the lows. Okay, our most critical times, I think a lot of us could do a lot of good with evaluating condition 3 times a year. If we're only going to do it once, weaning is probably the ideal time to do that because it's a time that allows us to make some change in condition prior to the calving and breeding seasons. But if we're going to have an ideal situation where we're evaluating it 3 times, that's going to be at the beginning of breeding season. It's going to be at weaning and then the beginning of the calving season. And that information can really provide us with some insight into what we may need to do or change from a management standpoint. Okay, but that's the important part, is that this provides us the opportunity or informs decisions that we make and allows us to make necessary changes. Okay, also need to understand that it probably in most situations, unless we're limit feeding cattle in a dry lot, It's not going to make economic sense to maintain cows at a standard body condition score. If we are limit feeding cattle, so feeding a TMR in a dry lot situation, that's a whole different discussion. And then it does make economic sense to maintain condition. Okay. But let's use the good times to increase body condition to a level that's going to keep it high enough during the bad times. Okay. So use those times when nutrient requirements are lowest. So basically after weaning, so mid to late gestation or middle gestation to the early parts of late gestation, to try to accrete or accumulate some body condition in cows so that they have enough to burn when they need it. Okay. Oops. So the other thing to keep in mind is that there is going to be variation within a herd. Okay. And so I'm showing you just what I'm going to call a normal bell-shaped distribution. Okay. And so as this line gets higher, that means we'd expect there to be a greater portion of those within the population. Okay. So if our 5s are our average, okay, there's going to be fewer 4s and fewer 6s, even fewer 3s and even fewer 7s, and even fewer or no 2s and 8s. Okay. But it's important to recognize that they're not all going to be 5s. They're not all going to be 6s. Okay. So what I encourage you to do for those that are on the left-hand side of this curve is don't make excuses for those cows. Okay. Make sure that they pull their own weight, make sure they get pregnant, they raise a desirable calf. The same, I want to say for those that are on the far right-hand side of that curve, make sure that those cows are pulling their own weight. Okay. So those cows that stay really heavily conditioned, is it because they're what we're going to perceive as efficient at and effective at maintaining weight and condition, or is it because they were weaning a calf that's 25% of their body weight? Okay. And those of you that may laugh at that, there are quite a few of those out there. And you might find that you have some of those if you start weighing cows and calves. But again, the point being, there's variation here. You know, we want to strive for them to be 4s to 6s. Okay, we get outside of that, we need to put selection and culling pressure on those females. And we can do that by not making any excuses for slips in productivity. Okay, identifying the source of the problems. So we'll start with less than ideal body condition. So skinny cows, if it's a small portion of the cattle, I'm typically not that concerned about that. It's most likely that those individuals are not matched to the environment and our management from a genetic standpoint, or we had some adverse excuse me, had some adverse health event. If it's a large portion of the cattle that are too thin, nutrition is likely the issue, whether that's induced by overgrazing or we're overstocked or undersupplemented. Probably going to be some combination of those three. Most likely that's going to be a consequence of us being overstocked, which is not incredibly uncommon. All right. Our greater than ideal body condition. So our over conditioned cattle, it's a small portion. They may be more efficient than the others, or they may not be working hard enough for you. So take a long, hard look at them. Are they over conditioned because we held them over a year? They lost a calf, or that calf's just not performing. If it's a large portion of the cattle, they're most likely being overfed, or we're not asking them to be productive enough. We're not requiring them to generate a calf for us on a regular enough basis. Excuse me. All right. Additional resources. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. We've got quite a few within our Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Beef Group. I encourage you to check some of these out. You can find them at beef.tamu.edu under publications, or if you go to ranchtv.org, it'll take you to a YouTube site with some videos. One of those is market cow management, where, if I remember correctly, Ron Gill spends quite a bit of time focusing on body condition. I'm sure that you all have access to a lot of other references and resources in that regard as well. So I'd certainly encourage you to rely on those as well. All right, last questions I want to ask you. The first one is will this information, so knowledge gained today, do you think it's going to be valuable to your operation? And remember, I can't see who you are. So if you say no, I'm not going to come find you because I don't know who's answering what. Excellent. Excellent. All right. So almost everyone thought this was going to be valuable. And so the last question, do you have the intention to apply any of these concepts to your management strategies? Or another way of asking that, did you learn something new that you're gonna apply to your operation and use to make decisions? Excellent, excellent. So almost everyone said yes. So one that makes me feel good, and so it sounds like this was a valuable addition to the webinar series. So thank you all for that feedback. That's incredibly valuable for me. I've got my contact information here. I think Courtney has PDF slides to send out if anybody wants them. That contact information is there. I know I ran a little over. I'm short on time. But certainly would love to answer any questions that you have, whether it's on body condition or anything else nutritionally or management related.
Yeah, and just real quick, I'll say that we do have a post-webinar survey that you'll also be taking.
Excellent.
So as soon as I end this webinar, it should pop up in your browser, but if it doesn't, I have the system to where it will send you an email with it tomorrow. So don't freak out if you don't see it as soon as I end the webinar. You'll also get it in an email. For the sake of time, Jason, I do have one good question that I'll ask you.
Okay.
So how do you relate body condition to genetics? For example, if we are continually breeding let's say a body condition 4, how much of that is she passing on to her calves? What are we doing there?
So that's a great question. And I think if I think back to that bell-shaped curve that I showed you, if we think about all the females in our operation, so answering that question, how much is their body condition related to genetics? If our operation really is managed the same way for all cattle, I'm gonna argue it's 100% related to genetics. Nothing's 100%, but the point being that if we're managing environments the same for all those cattle, the thing that has changed that influences phenotype is genetics. And so we can certainly have highly productive body condition score 4s. We can have highly productive body condition score 3s, but if that's what our environment is going to support, from a genetic standpoint, it's very critical that we are very judicious about selecting which of those females we retain heifers out of and which of those females we keep in the herd, because we have to put positive selection pressure on reproduction in those lower condition type cattle for them to remain productive. You can make the argument about extremely high condition cattle as well, but to answer your question and to the point, genetics play a huge role in this. Absolutely. And one of the other things that I'd like to point out is that genetics is our opportunity in most situations to change condition and productivity to a substantial degree if we don't want to pay for it through feeding. Okay. And so we have a tremendous amount of opportunity to use genetics to identify the females that maintain adequate condition and productivity, so they check all of our boxes through selection. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we talk a lot about culling females and selecting on the female side, and that's incredibly important. Sire selection is how we make the majority of genetic change in the cow herd. So I would encourage you to think long and hard about the EPDs, the bulls that we're selecting to create our future cow herd, and particularly encourage everyone to look at the whole picture for that animal and not get caught on 1 or 2 EPDs or even $1 or $2 value indices. We can, in my opinion, I'm not a geneticist, so take that for what it's worth. But I think we can have some negative things come along for the ride if we aren't very careful, and we go down that road of single or few trait selection. But again, huge opportunity to make for genetics to influence condition on the operation. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, we are right at the time point, so I'm going to just ask that question and let that conclude our webinar 1 in the Midday Master Beef series. So thank you so much, Dr. Smith. That was awesome.
If anybody else has questions that they didn't get to ask, my email address is on there. Courtney and Justin both know how to get a hold of me. So don't hesitate to send those questions my way. Happy to help in any way that I can.
Awesome. Good deal. So that's it, everyone. And we'll see everybody Thursday. Dr. Strickland will be talking about some fly control strategies. So have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all.